All right, let's dive right into Arthur Miller's classic play, A View from the Bridge. Now, if you just glance at the surface, you might think, okay, this is a really intimate, localized story about a family living in Brooklyn. But what's absolutely fascinating here is how this play is literally a masterclass in how global politics and cultural paranoia can completely shape a deeply personal piece of art. Today, in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how the massive macro level tensions of the world stage manage to trickle all the way down into a single working class household. Which brings us to the big central question we're tackling today. How exactly did a Cold War political witch hunt inspire a classic American tragedy? To really get Miller's masterpiece, you can't just look at the characters on the page. We have to zoom out and look at the immense, real-world political pressures that were just breathing down his neck while he was writing it. So here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Politics of the Cold War. 2. Omerta on the docks. 3. A legendary Hollywood rivalry. 4. Law versus community justice. And 5. The irrational human animal.
Section 1. Politics of the Cold War.
Picture this. It's June 21st, 1956. We are at the absolute height of the McCarthy era, and Arthur Miller is called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC. They wanted him to name names of suspected communist sympathizers. Well, Miller outright refused. But what's interesting is he didn't invoke the Fifth Amendment's protection against self-incrimination, which is what a lot of other people did. Instead, he relied squarely on the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech. He basically told them the committee had zero right to inquire into his political activities or force him to inform on anyone else. Now, this stand earned him a ton of respect in the arts community, but it also landed him a contempt of Congress charge, which he had to fight later on. The really crucial thing to understand here is the intense environment Miller was trying to work in. This wasn't just some polite political debate going on. It was a full-blown cultural panic gripping the entertainment industry. Studios were absolutely desperate to prove their anti-communist patriotism. Take Harry Cohn, for example, the president of Columbia Pictures. When Miller tried to pitch an early script about corrupt union bosses, Cohn demanded that the villains be changed to communists just to fit the political climate. Miller said no, and the project just died right there. In this era, the act of naming names wasn't just a political move. It became the ultimate dividing line, a defining moral test that was fracturing American society.
Section 2. Omerta on the docks.
So to really understand the Red Hook neighborhood in the 1950s, you have to understand this one specific term, omerta. It's a strict Sicilian code of honor. It basically demands absolute silence, complete non-cooperation with official authorities, and the protection of your community members from the law at all costs. In this neighborhood, turning someone into the government, becoming a stool pigeon or a rat, was the ultimate unforgivable sin. Doing that meant banishment from your community or, honestly, even death.
After World War II, there was this massive influx of new Italian immigrants, and many of them were completely undocumented, coming straight to the Brooklyn docks. And naturally, they brought these deep Sicilian traditions with them. Down in Red Hook, the traditional codes of street honor often completely overpowered the official, written American laws. The community looked out for its own. They sheltered undocumented family members, and they settled their disputes entirely internally. Miller actually stumbled upon the real-world seeds for his play while he was researching this exact community. He noticed graffiti painted on the piers that just asked, "Where is Pete Panto?" Pete Panto was a real guy. He was a young longshoreman who bravely stood up and challenged the mafia leaders running the Seamen's Union, and then he just mysteriously vanished. The absolute silence of the other longshoremen around Panto's disappearance really showed Miller the deadly stakes of omerta. Nobody was going to say a word to the authorities.
Section 3. A legendary Hollywood rivalry. Now we have to talk about this incredible sequence of events that unfolded over just a few years. In 1947, Miller starts researching a screenplay called The Hook, all about the Brooklyn docks. By 1951, he and his really close friend, director Elia Kazan, were actively pitching it to studios. But then the HUAC trials hit. Kazan made the agonizing decision to testify and name names of former communists. Miller, as we know, refused. And just like that, their friendship was completely shattered. Fast forward to 1954, Kazan teams up with another cooperative witness, Bud Schulberg, to make the massive hit film On the Waterfront. And that story heavily borrowed from Miller's original dockside research. Then, the very next year in 1955, Miller debuts A View from the Bridge. It's wild because you have these two former friends faced with the exact same political test, taking totally opposite paths. Elia Kazan named names to the government. Then he goes and directs On the Waterfront, a movie where the hero, Terry Malloy, bravely informs on corrupt union bosses. So that film portrays informing as this virtuous, heroic act of truth-telling. But then you look at Arthur Miller. He refused to name names. He writes A View from the Bridge, where the main character informs on illegal immigrants, and it leads to his absolute disgrace and death. Miller's play portrays betrayal of your community as a devastating, tragic evil. You have two incredible artists with two totally opposite views on the morality of informing, born from the exact same political era.
Section 4. Law versus community justice. Let's break down how these fundamentally opposing definitions of justice actually play out with the characters, because they are definitely not on the same page. First up, Alfieri. He's the lawyer and the narrator, and he represents written U.S. law, the law of books and courts. Then we have Marco. He's an immigrant from Sicily, and he represents natural law, so the unwritten rules of street honor, duty, and revenge. And finally, we've got our tragic protagonist, Eddie Carbone. Eddie operates on what we might call a moral law, but as the story goes on, his sense of justice becomes completely twisted by his own personal unconscious desires. So American legality and Sicilian duty are just on a direct collision course here.
There's this moment where Alfieri the lawyer is watching this whole tragedy unfold, and he comes to this stark realization. He says, the law is nature. The law is only a word for what has a right to happen. Alfieri is realizing that the written laws he practices every day are often entirely powerless when they go up against the natural, unwritten laws of human emotion and street justice. American law says these immigrants are illegal, right? But the community law says they absolutely must be protected. And that is the true symbolism of the Brooklyn Bridge right there in the play's title. The bridge isn't just some physical structure in the background. It's a powerful symbol connecting the civilized, modern U.S. law of Manhattan on one side with the ancient, traditional Sicilian codes of Red Hook on the other. It represents this inescapable, almost fatal tension between written rules and tribal vengeance. They are two worlds connected by a bridge, but fundamentally at odds with each other.
Section 5. The irrational human animal. Now, at the very heart of this huge geopolitical and cultural clash is a deeply personal, really messy human reality. Eddie Carbone has raised his 18-year-old niece, Catherine, but as she starts falling in love with one of the illegal immigrants he's sheltering, a young guy named Rodolfo, Eddie's protective uncle routine turns into this repressed, incestuous jealousy. He becomes totally obsessed. He aggressively shames Rodolfo. He even kisses him on the lips in this desperate, really disturbing attempt to quote-unquote expose him. Eddie's latent desires just cause him to lose total control over his actions and, honestly, his reason. And once that reason goes out the window, it leads to the ultimate betrayal. Driven to absolute desperation to stop Catherine from getting married, Eddie does the unthinkable in Red Hook. He picks up a phone and informs U.S. immigration. By breaking omerta, he instantly loses everything. His name, his respect, his whole identity in the neighborhood. And it gets worse. He essentially seals his own fate, because now Marco is bound by that unwritten Sicilian law to exact revenge. The whole thing wraps up with Alfieri reflecting on the wreckage, and he just states, the truth is holy. Alfieri recognizes that humans are, at our core, irrational animals. When you strip away the laws written in the books and we start acting purely on raw instinct and unleashed passion, the consequences are almost always tragic. Eddie just couldn't suppress his irrational self, and in the end, it destroyed him. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to chew on. When state legality clashes with deeply held community loyalty, which code of justice truly governs our actions? Are we bound by the laws written down in books, or are we bound by the unwritten codes of the communities we belong to? Arthur Miller took a massive global Cold War panic and used it to ask a deeply intimate question about human nature. And it's a question we are for sure still wrestling with today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gives you a whole new perspective the next time you encounter A View from the Bridge. Keep questioning and keep learning.